So my first thought on this is we need to look at grieving as a peak performance skill. The end goal of effective grieving is acceptance and gratitude. That we can be filled back up with gratitude. You know, one strategy that's kind of interesting is whatever our situation is, we could ask ourselves, could it be worse? And the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. Okay, but it's not worse. It's just what it is. And then we get to say, okay, what would happen if I brought my creative brain, my powerful self, to this situation now? You know, it's been said that by the time we're 5, we've developed a rule book. We've been programmed. We got the rules of how we're going to manage life. And so whether you're a teacher or a student, whether you are in the throes of an injury or not, what you have to recognize is the injury is going to land on top of your history. Clark, probably one of the most important parts about the Stay Healthy team and the attitude that you want to have about your support and your health is nobody else is going to do it but you. The educator really needs to adopt the mindset that I have a student who's growing, discovering, mastering. It's all good. It's all part of the journey. Understand the injury and really understand what it is and get really clear with that, and then manage that emotional side of it, because that emotional side is going to be what's going to be directing your recovery and how you cope with the different challenges with that. So yeah, there's just so many different things that we can do, and just recognizing that it's a one day at a time adventure.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're starting season 2 off with a bang of Trust the Process. And when I was in the interim phase of planning this season, I knew that I needed to make some changes to benefit you guys, and in conversations that I was having with members of the audience, and just how I felt like the show needed to go. And so today, our first guest of season 2 is someone who, to my knowledge, and I might be wrong, has not gone through an injury as a musician. But
not
has
true.
Helped. Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah, but has helped many musicians with the psychological aspect of performing. I actually took his class at BYU, his psychology of performance class when I was there, and easily it was the best class I took, most influential class I took. And I'm not just saying that because he's here in front of me. That's actually true. I took almost 40 pages of notes in that class. And I still go back to them every now and again now. And it's amazing. I was just telling him off camera that, I was surprised as I was preparing for this interview, going back to those class notes, of how many things that I have learned and internalized in my journey as a musician going through injury that I learned at first in his class. And so we're going to go into a couple of those things today. Dr. Jon Skidmore, welcome to the show.
It was a pleasure to be here. It's great to see what you're doing and how you're taking what little, gems I shared with you to a much bigger audience. I'm excited about that. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you're here too. This is a really, really exciting way to start season 2 off. I really feel like, the opportunity that we give musicians to share their stories with injury is really beneficial to the audience and their healing and their journey of coming back psychologically and physically. But I knew that the importance of getting the experts in on the psychology of performance and the psychology of life, I guess, would be really important to my audience. So let's just get started. With my audience, most of the time when they experience injury for the first time, it comes as a shock to them, right? Mm-hmm. And that comes with no small amount of psychological side effects, we should say. I forgot to mention in the intro that you spent the majority of your career as a clinical psychologist as well as being a performance psychologist. And in that, I'm sure you, not just with musicians, but with people in general, helped them manage grief. And in the class that I took with you, you talk. We had, I think, a whole class period or something talking about the stages of grief. And so, real quick, could you just kind of go through what those are and how they, like, if we were to put them under the lens of a musician just got injured, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's so many different directions we could go with this. And my first thought on this is we need to look at grieving as a peak performance skill. Like, it's one of those skills we need to be trained in. We need to understand grieving because we will experience grief in many different levels, in many different places in our lives. And as a performer, now for some, that grief could be they didn't get the position they wanted at the New York Philharmonic. For others, it might be, oh, my voice is injured. In your case, the lip is injured. And so we have to recognize that we've got to process the myriad of losses that are a part of living life. And so as we do that, as we look at grieving, the premier person who came up with the idea of stages of grief was a person named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And the way I like to describe this is we're going to go through lots of different phases and aspects of grieving. We may not, well, in one area we're going to be more at peace, another area we're still going to be kind of angry or frustrated or really dreading that or hurt by it. And so it's not like we go up or down a flight of stairs. So the different aspects of grief can be in different places. And so the way I like to look at it is more from the perspective that once we experience a loss, we have to acknowledge there's going to be a reaction and a first response to that loss. And sometimes it's absolutely overwhelming. Sometimes it's devastating. Sometimes it's so even terrifying. What is this loss going to mean to me? So the first thing we have to be aware of when there's any kind of injury or loss is we're going to have a reaction to it. Like, okay, expect a reaction to it because we're going to have one. And then we get to figure out what we're going to do about it. Now, the way I like to approach it, and this is really coming from my clinical training as a psychologist, we experience the loss, we have the shock of the loss. And then we've got to start to go into a working with this loss. And what does this loss mean to us? So I like to actually follow a funeral process in many areas where we have a viewing, where we have to really look at the facts. Now, over the years, I've talked to musicians who have been in denial about their injury. And they just fight it and medicate it and pain relievers and ignore it until they can't anymore. And so really the first part of this in the realm of a musician is to recognize that this instrument we have, the body that we're using, we do put underneath a tremendous amount of stress, strain, challenge. But it's not supposed to be in pain when we're doing that. So one of the things we need to be aware of is if we're experiencing that signal calling pain, there's something out of place. And what do we do with it? And too many of us are really very good at ignoring pain, both physically and emotionally. And so as we experience the loss, we've got to view it. We've got to actually look at it as, oh, what is this? Now, sometimes that's really hard. If you were the first chair violinist in a symphony orchestra and your reputation, your livelihood, your identity is wrapped up in your violin playing and you're dealing with a certain amount of pain in that hand, you're going to have to figure out how to manage that. And so again, it's a challenge to figure out what is the stress and strain that's normal versus an injury. I know, for example, a lot of professional athletes, they know when they get hurt, and that's just part of the game because they got knocked down. And they also know when they're like, no, I'm injured. Like there's really a serious problem here. And so there needs to be a sensitivity for us and a willingness to look at what is going on. So that's part of the viewing. We have to look at this. What is going on? Now, in the funeral context, you go to a viewing We see the casket. There's Uncle Bob's in the casket. We have this undeniable realization, awareness. Okay, Uncle Bob is in the casket. He's not alive. But we've got to be able to look at it. And so again, sometimes it's just really hard to look at things. And if you're in that space where you're really struggling to look at the injury you have, find some courage. Take some courage, because this really is time to look at it. Problems when they're small are much easier to manage and deal with than when they're really big. And so again, being able to recognize there's some kind of loss of function here. And in viewing this, what I think is really important is that you're viewing it through a variety of eyes. In other words, there could be a medical doctor that's a part of this. Okay, well, that's a family practitioner. It might be an ENT. Okay, it might be somebody who specializes in rehab kinds of medicine. There are some doctors that will, describe themselves as specialists with performing artists. And so you want to be able to view whatever's going on with as much information as possible. And sometimes that takes time. Sometimes it can be very costly. But you want to make sure you know what you're viewing. And so if we can clearly identify what this is, then we're going to know how best to process this, how best to work with this. So stage one really is we got to view it. Stage two on this is really more of, well, what does this mean to us? So in the funeral, we have a viewing, then we have a service, some kind of funeral service. Well, in this situation, we're talking about servicing the emotion, servicing the grief, servicing the loss. And one of the most important parts about this is the goal of a good funeral service is to not only create a sense of appreciation for who this person was, but also to expand our understanding, to expand our appreciation.
It's a celebration of life, right?
Yes, and the appreciation of life. And so when we're in this servicing place, this again is where we need to have a perspective outside of our own. See, if we're locked into our own perspective, whatever that is what we're stuck with. And so servicing, just like in a good funeral, you hear lots of good stories, you hear sharing. And so you got to share this story with a lot of people. And hopefully they're supportive people. And we get to share this, and then we start to understand what it is we're saying. The despair, the hopelessness, the fear of the loss, could be career ending, all these kinds of things. Well, we get to share this. We get to talk about this. And one thing that we know about the human mind and how we think and view things is it's quite prone to distortion, inaccuracies. Well, I shouldn't be having this injury right now. Well, it doesn't care. It's not cooperating. It's an injury. You've got to manage it. But our language is saying I shouldn't have this is a language more of denial. It's a language of this is something that I don't want to deal with. And that's really one of the hardest parts. And that's usually in the front end of the grieving process. But as we can share the story, as we can find teachers, coaches, therapists, doctors, as we can talk about this with friends, colleagues, then our understanding of this can expand. I'm thinking of a student who talked about her lifelong dream to be in the New York Philharmonic. But to fulfill this desire, she did a lot of over-practicing. And now her wrist was really, really in pain. And all she could see is her dream vanishing. Well, she may or may not have ever made it in the New York Philharmonic. I don't know for sure. But, if the New York Philharmonic is the only goal, that's a very narrow perspective on life. And so we have to learn how to expand that out and how to move that so we're not just stuck with one perspective that we feel like we can't achieve or reach. So when it comes to an injury thing, we go through that shock. We have to really look at it and get clear with what it is. Then we got to process this. What does this mean to us? One of the things I love to talk about is how our brain is a meaning-making machine, and it's going to come up with some understanding, some explanation of whatever it is we're dealing with. And so this is where one tool, which is a very standard grieving tool, is journaling or writing the experience, journaling and writing the emotions, journaling it in terms of from different perspectives. Okay, the mature person in me who understands life on a bigger picture can says, this is an injury I can cope with. The performer in me is going to be saying, but what if I can't perform? And there's a different conversation there. And oftentimes it's very helpful to have other people, even professional people, that you can talk and work with to help expand your perspective on this story. So the service, when it comes to emotional things like an injury, should result in, I call it, 2 piles of stuff. One pile of stuff needs a final resting place. It's basically not possible anymore. It's basically distorted. My only goal in life is to be in the New York Philharmonic. If I can't get there, my life is not worth living. Now, there are some people that have gone that extreme. Mm-hmm. And that's a serious situation when someone's that extreme. But to let go of and put in one pile that, okay, the idea that my life is not worth living if I can't get in the New York Philharmonic, is that really a true statement? No, it's really
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. And so we have to recognize that that belief goes into the pile that needs a final resting place. It needs a burial site. And so that's kind of interesting because each of us grieve differently. And so we got to figure out what's going to work for us. And so to share the grief and let go of that belief that, yes, my life will only be complete, fulfilled, and meaningful if I'm in the New York Philharmonic. Okay, I need to let that go somehow. And so that's where we get to let it go. Now, the writing is a great strategy, sharing it. Some people have gone down to railroad tracks and thrown glass bottles and broken glass all over the place. I mean, whatever's going to work for you.
Release the energy.
Yes, release that energy. I had a client once that built a Viking funeral barge for his loss.
That's awesome.
And it was relatively small, but he took it out on his boat and put it out on a lake. And he had pictures and he had memories and he had hopes and dreams and lots of symbolism in this. And then he actually put some gasoline on it and set it aflame and just watched it burn.
There you go.
That was kind of his way of saying, I need to let this go. And so those beliefs, those attitudes that need to be let go really need to be, okay, I got to bury this. And I got to let this go. And it needs to be a place where it can be at rest there. And if or when it shows up to one degree or another or gets reawakened, it's kind of like, oh, I buried you. You go back here. Sometimes you have to repeat it more than a few times because grieving is such an involved process. And so we have one pile of stuff that basically says, final resting place. This is lies, distortion. I don't want to hold on to this anymore. Let's bury that. Okay. Now, the other part of the servicing, the other pile, is the new meaning, the new story, the new framework, the new perspective, the new hope or possibility that we're seeking. And so maybe the New York Philharmonic is not possible, but there's a community orchestra. I can still find fulfillment in a community orchestra. And you have to decide that's going to be fulfilling. If you can show up to that rehearsal in the community orchestra and just say, okay, this is a joyful, fulfilling experience, it's going to be different than if you're there in your grief saying, I should be at the New York Philharmonic. I was good enough. I was on track to be good enough to be there. I got injured. Now I'm not.
So can I just ask real quick, for anybody who's listening, who's like, the only opportunity I have right now is a community orchestra, and I do want to find that fulfilling, but I don't know how. Like, what are some ways that they can find that fulfillment in these new opportunities?
Well, finding that fulfillment is really a choice. that you have to declare that being in this community orchestra is good enough for now. In fact, I'm grateful for this opportunity now. This is an opportunity that's helping me develop, helping me recover, giving me a safe place to work through the injury. So again, it's really letting go of the old and bringing in the new. One of my favorite stories about this was a young man at a remix vocal a cappella camp a few years ago. His attitude about being there was, "This is lame. I don't want to be here. I want to go home." Well, he had this unhappy cloud, just this unhappy camper cloud all over him. And I couldn't imagine such a thing. I thought this would be like a heavenly place. And he was like in the despair of the cloud. I had a chance to talk to him. And I said, so if you could reach in your head and pull out that negative thought or feeling, what would it be? "This is lame and I want to go home." Okay, throw it in the trash. Okay, what could you put back in there? And he goes, "This is fun."
Imagine that.
Imagine that. So he had to decide that this was okay. And he ended up having a great experience there. But see, he was going through this feeling of, I don't want to be here. I don't want the reality of this. And so he had to let that go. And he ended up having a great experience, which I was very excited about. And for him, he had to embrace what was here. And so, again, when we're struggling with how do we accept something less than what we wanted, we have to come back to, well, what's here right now? And am I choosing this? Am I accepting this? And I like the phrase, for right now, it's more than good enough.
Yeah, I've heard some actually athletic coaches or mental skills coaches say, like, when they're coaching athletes through injury, they say, "I'd prefer not to be here, but while I'm here, I might as well, and then fill in the blank," right?
Yeah.
Just the language is really important, right?
The language is very important. Sure, I want to be out there on that football field. Sure, I want to be out there on that stage. But right now, I've got to work within the intensity and the focus and the creativity so I can do the rehab, so I can possibly get back out there. And that's with that hope of getting back out there. And so that's just a real important part of this. Now, when you think about the answer to your question, Clark, it's a practice. We got to be willing to say, wow, I want to have a good attitude today. I got a crappy attitude today. Oh, I want to practice letting go of something. What am I going to shift away from? Reach in, pull it out, throw it away. What do I want to put back in there? And that's such an important thing to be able to do.
So important. And I'll tell you, like, when I first was in your class, I mean, this is now, when did I take your class? It was right after I got injured. So it would have been winter semester 2023. So March, April, sometime in there. And I remember us talking about all these things. And at that point, my injury had taken way longer than it should have.
Right. It shouldn't have taken that long.
Yeah. Right. And I was starting to get feel the mental effects of that, the anxiety, the depression, and all that stuff. And I remember thinking, when we were talking about all these things, like, how's that even possible for me, right? And I look back at that over a year later, and all the work that I've had to do, and I've chosen to do, and I've been very fortunate to do. And just the realization that it takes time. There's the whole thing about neuroplasticity, of rewiring your brain to go different directions when, like, a lot of the times we have different situations that happen in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, the way we decide to interpret them is usually one or two different paths. Like, either we're going to, like, work with it, or we're going to be ticked off by it, or we're going to be depressed by it, or whatever. And it's just literally like that little shift that's like, if we are willing to just take that shift where it leads us and just keep going with it every day as best we can. It was like, for me, the realization was just like, over time, I just realized, I don't, like, that type of thing doesn't bug me anymore. Or like, something just hit me in the face, a new situation that was really troublesome, and I reacted differently than I would have done a year ago.
That's called growth.
It is. Yeah.
Healing.
Imagine that.
Yeah. It really is.
The principle is that it takes time, and especially when it comes to, like our how we view the world, right? How we view our situation, those types of like mindsets and, I guess frame of thinking, that takes a long time, but it's so worth it. I cannot tell you, I guess, talking to the audience, how worth it is to put in that work and see the benefits of it. So anyway, keep going.
It's been said that by the time we're 5, we've developed a rule book. We've been programmed. We got the rules of how we're going to manage life. And so whether you're a teacher or a student, whether you are in the throes of an injury or not, what you have to recognize is the injury is going to land on top of your history. And whatever's there in the history is going to show up first. And what you're really describing is, I've got to be able to be clear with my present moment. What's going on right now? And how do I look at this with a present focus, current situation, fresh eyes, so to speak, rather than the eyes of a 5-year-old. Because the eyes of a 5-year-old, this is the worst thing in the world that could have ever happened. It's just horrible and terrible. And it's just absolutely, it should not have happened. Well, as an adult, you get to say, this is part of life. This is a situation that showed up. What are my choices? See, that's more of the adult thinking.
Right.
Yeah, great question. And I really appreciated you bringing out that sense of it does take time. And it really does take practice. And that's why we get to support ourselves and we get to manage this every day and develop a whole bunch of tools. We all need great tools to help us manage our emotions and our experiences in life. And so I'm glad that you're doing this, because this is going to be a great thing. And so whether, talking to a dear friend, journaling, meditating, ripping something up, burning it, whatever it is, breaking bottles, whatever works for you is going to work for you.
I don't recommend funeral pyring your violin, though. You might need that later on.
I would not recommend that either.
Unless that's really where you need to go, but hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to do that. That would not be,
Get some money for it if you're going to stop playing.
Yeah, at least get some money out of it. So, as we talk about grieving, we go through that loss and the shock of that loss. There really is such a thing as a grief brain. It slows us down. It makes it hard to do things. It just makes it hard to compute basic mathematical stuff, solve problems. Well, we got to go through these stages. We get to service this. We get to process it. So again, one pile of stuff we want to let go of. That's not something I want to believe anymore. That's not something I'm not going to go down that direction. That's gone. It's dead. Mm-hmm. And then we want to take the other pile of stuff is, okay, where do I take this now? Now, typically in the funeral process, we have a viewing, service, burial, and some kind of luncheon or some kind of meeting. And so really what we want to take from the grieving service is things that are going to help us create and build and share and continue the development of who we are as an individual and as an artist. And we have to keep looking for opportunities. We get to create opportunities. Now, that's often very difficult for people who've gone through an injury kind of thing, and now they're back into an orchestra. They're back in that band. They're back ready for an audition. And this is where lots of old feelings can start to show up again. Old fears. My daughter is a young gymnast on the balance beam, launched, landed, and broke her wrist.
Ouch.
Oh, man. It took her months before she could get back on that balance beam and launch and land again. And she continued to do that. But that was one of those things where that injury and the fear of injury is part of, what we get to deal with. But she also did say if she thought about getting hurt or breaking her wrist again, there's no way she could have jumped. There's no way she would have launched.
Right.
And so again, it's the risk I'm willing to take. She was willing to do that. She had the goal to do that. She was physically strong enough. She was ready, and she worked through that and was able to compete successfully with a back handspring. But boy, I just remember talking about that. If I was at all hesitant, if I was at all scared, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, it paralyzes you.
Yeah,
That fear of re-injury. It definitely can. And then I know there's a few other stages of grief, right? And so how does those, I know we've talked about it in my situation before, specifically like towards acceptance and things like that. And maybe that's what you're already getting at.
Well, I really am. I appreciate that. See, we can go through the bargaining, we can go through the anger and rage, we can go through the fear and trauma and drama, the despair and the grief. But somehow we got to get to this place of acceptance. And then we're in a place where we can start to be creative with what we have.
Absolutely.
And see, the end goal of effective grieving is acceptance and gratitude. That we can be filled back up with gratitude. You know, one strategy that's kind of interesting is whatever our situation is, we could ask ourselves, could it be worse? And the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably. Okay, but it's not worse. It's just what it is. And then we get to say, okay, what would happen if I brought my creative brain, my powerful self, to this situation now? Rather than being despairing and depressed about going to any kind of doctor, it's like, I got to find out information. I got to get this to work for me. I want to be able to discover what I can discover here. And so that's just really the hardest part of it. So acceptance is the key to so many things, because no one's life, no one's career turns out exactly as planned. And that sense of acceptance is really what allows us to be creative and move forward with what we have, rather than resentful, fearful, angry, frustrated, annoyed, resistant. And so, you know, it's really easy to say, well, just practice acceptance. There's a concept out there called radical acceptance, just like it is the way it is. And it is that way. So don't pretend it's not. It just is this way. Okay, what do you choose to do with this in a powerful, creative way?
No, it's so good. And I think there are a lot of people going to be listening to this being like, yep, I can relate to that. Yep, I can relate to that. And that's the whole reason why we're doing it, right? And I just can't stress what you just pointed out enough. Like and we've talked about this before in our own personal conversations of the importance of just that creativity. I love that you mentioned that. The creativity that can come if you're willing to get curious about how can you move forward? You know, what opportunities are now yours because of this injury? There's a book that I just finished reading. I'm actually reading it again with a little finer tooth comb called Rebound. And it's actually this athletic mental skills coach who helps athletes go through injury. And she talks about secondary gains in this book. And her definition is basically the positive consequences of your injury, right? Like one of them for me, honestly, like when I first got injured, it was like, oh, I actually get a break. I mean, depending on how you look at that, that's a good or a bad thing. But in some ways I chose to look at it as a good thing because it's it's a big part of your day, right? And can be physically taxing. And so anyway, the creativity that you are able to experience once you get to that stage of the grieving process is so beneficial. It's so important because as we pointed out in previous episodes on the show, is like you don't know when you're going to come back. When that's going to happen. And if you try to force it, that's in my situation can cause more of a time on the bench.
Well, again, it's a challenge to believe we're ready, and in a culture that wants us to succeed, especially the young musician who's wanting to be out there and doing things. Okay, I'll take that, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't, and we call those setbacks. And at that point, we have to regroup and take on again what our plan is, what we're going to do to get through this.
Yeah, totally. Before I kind of want to change gears in a little bit, talking about injury prevention and the psychological aspects of that. But before we do, because a lot of people listening to the show are just in completely different parts of their recovery.
Yes.
When from your perspective as a performance psychologist, if they find themselves at the crossroads of like, okay, I can either move on with these things that I've found, that are so beneficial to me outside of my instrument, and maybe it's time to hang it up with my instrument or whatever, because just whatever the circumstances may be for their individual injury, or to keep going down the path of recovery to their original plan. What would be some key things to take into consideration, or like how would you counsel somebody that's trying to make that decision?
Well, first off, I would look at that as a team decision. One of the things I talk a lot about in my class as I coach people is, what is your stay healthy team saying right now? And who's on your team? You'd have different people. Some people would have a chiropractor. Another person would like, no way. Somebody might have an acupuncturist. Another person's like, no way. Somebody might have a chiropractor, acupuncture, MD, as many people as they can get on their team. And so it's really about, okay, the best advice you get from those around you, your awareness, your understanding of what you're experiencing, balanced with your hopes and your grief. The more grief we've got present in us, the less likely we are to make those choices that are going to be healthy for us.
Right.
Because
totally,
it's going to be like, well, I've got to do this. I've got to be in the New York Philharmonic, so I'm just going to practice harder. I don't care if my wrist hurts.
No. And anybody listening on audio, I was rapidly shaking my head.
Oh yeah, rapidly shaking it. And I would not recommend that, because that just causes more pain and more problems.
Absolutely.
And so when you're in that decision making, this is where you got to accurately view it, see it clearly, and what's going to be the cost of going down path A or path B? What are the possibilities and opportunities of path A and path B? Okay, what are the risks? Are you willing to accept those risks?
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, let's chart a course and take action and see how it works and pivot as we need to pivot.
Right. It's that taking action part that I think is the operative. Well, it's the active word.
Yes, it is.
Because like we were talking before, the fear of re-injury can be paralyzing. And if you're like me, if anybody out there is like me, I'm very much a person who I almost want to, like, whenever I'm making a big decision, I almost want to just, like, in my research in making that decision, I almost put the onus of, like, actually making the decision on somebody else. And so, like, I'll ask my folks of, like, okay, what should I do here? And I'm like, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, but, like, whatever they tell me is probably going to be better than what I have planned. So it's like, you have to be willing to just act and be willing to, obviously, like, make an informed decision, but not let the need to be, I guess, 100% ready or 100% fully informed to paralyze you from making the decision and just moving forward.
Well, there are so many times in life we just do the best. It's our best guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just our best guess. And are we willing to accept it? Are we willing to move forward with this at whatever level? And if we are, then we are.
Right.
And it's like, I chose to do this. Okay, I chose to pursue a very intensive rehab program. Well, the hope is that's going to lead to positive results. But for somebody else, that might lead to negative results. And then we can spend a lot of time talking about what's good advice and what's bad advice. There's been people that have been greatly benefited by a certain course of action. Other people have been hurt by it.
Right.
And so again, as you get information from people, you get to decide, okay, does this make sense? Is this something I feel comfortable with? Is this something that's working for me? Because sometimes there is a have to push through pain kind of thing. But it shouldn't be making it worse.
Right.
It shouldn't be getting worse.
Right.
And so such a challenge.
You got to acknowledge that fact too. Like, injuries suck,
Yeah.
They do.
It's hard.
It's hard.
It is so hard.
It is hard. And for anybody who's in that part of part of the journey. My heart goes out to you.
Absolutely.
It is really hard. And my hope is, in listening to this, that you just feel that and also feel empowered to just keep moving forward in some way, shape, or form. Go ahead.
We've got to move forward. I mean, backwards just is even worse. And,
right.
Whatever occurs in our lives, I mean, there are people that have, had a great career, and a slip and fall on the ice. Suddenly it's like, wait a minute, I wasn't expecting that. So there's a certain unexpected or unplanned for element of life always.
Right.
And our biggest challenge is to pivot in a powerful way. And so to do our grieving quickly, and to acknowledge the grief, and to look out for those negative, destructive ways of dealing with grief.
Right.
It's okay to have a few sleepless nights. It's okay to be stressed out. It's okay to have some thinking be difficult for a while. But if you're not sleeping for weeks, things like drug and alcohol or avoidance are just like skyrocketing.
Right.
Destructive habits, patterns, that's just going to make things worse.
It will. Yeah. And I heard a podcast recently about this topic where the key is to move through these emotions and not away from them,
right?
Because they kind of chase you if you try to move away from them. And then that's where those destructive thought patterns and habits can kind of get you.
Well, that's also where it's so helpful to have a new set of tools and new support to help. The answer is going through this. It's to get to the other side of this. It's not
Absolutely.
to run away from it.
Absolutely. And that actually is a really good segue to kind of what I wanted to talk about next. You had mentioned it a little bit before, the importance of having a stay healthy team. I think that's a term that you actually used in our class, and not only a stay healthy team, but like stay healthy practices or habits that we can literally delineate, like on paper or wherever, to hold ourselves accountable to them, so that we are prioritizing this team and these habits. So can you go into that a little bit, and what that means for injury, like prevention and also recovery?
Well, the old adage that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I mean, prevention is a wonderful thing. If we can avoid something, let's avoid it. And so again, that means we're getting trained properly with technique and style. We're aware of some limitations. A trumpet player cannot play the trumpet nearly as long as a pianist can play the piano. It just doesn't work that way.
Nope.
Okay. And so just being willing to say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. And I got to know this. We want to be healthy. I was doing a workshop with some competition winners, and we had some free time, and the conversation was, let's go bowling. And the pianist in the group said, no, I'm not going bowling. She didn't want to put 15 pounds on that hand of hers. Right. So we got to be smart. If this is going to be stressing us in different ways, let's be smart about it. So this is one of the reasons why learning to say no is a powerful conversation. Can you do this? That's not going to work for me. That's not going to be healthy for me. And to honor that. And again, the anxiety, the stress we feel when it's like, oh, I said yes, but is that really going to be healthy for me? And sometimes it's really tough because we want to stretch and grow and expand. So am I like walking away from this, running away from this, or am I facing this? But I think it's real important that when we decide this isn't going to be good for me, or this is no longer working for me,
or it's not serving me.
Yeah, it's not serving me.
I love the concept of, is this serving me or is it not?
Yes.
It's a really good paradigm, at least for me, a helpful paradigm,
Right. And so we've got to be aware of that. And is this serving, growing, building, creating, or is this starting to interfere, hurt, undermine? And so that's another real important concept to be aware of. The other thing that you need to do on the Stay Healthy team is recognize that a personal coach in different ways can be really helpful. The best athletes, the best musicians, they have people they're talking to. And they have people that they can trust and rely on. And people that they can share the grief and the joy of what they're doing with. And that is so helpful because we get stuck and locked in our own perspective of things, and it just becomes very limiting. And so having that ongoing coaching process, and coaches can take many forms, is vital.
Absolutely.
Everybody has their own idea of health and strength. Everybody out there that's listening to this, we all know so many things that we, quote, should do to be healthy. And, we could talk about sleep. We could talk about exercise. We could talk about food and nutrition. We could talk about stress management. We could talk about so many different things. Well, if there's an area of your life that you recognize today, you're not taking the healthiest path. You're not making those healthy choices. Well, today is the only day we can make a choice. And whether that's the choice to not have a second serving, or the choice to go exercise, or the choice to rest and not push things so hard. See, that's what we need to be able to do. And so I just encourage you, as your audience is wrestling with whatever choices they need to have to be healthier, to find the courage to take those choices and to really look at what happens if we don't have that courage, we'll often go into distraction, avoidance, even destructive things. And that's a different kind of problem to deal with. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was actually another thing that with this Stay Healthy team and Stay Healthy Habits, stress management, especially, the research that I'm encountering and I've heard other people, talk about in their programs is, the stress management it can contribute to injury, and it can also contribute to re-injury. Like, we're talking from like injury prevention and also coming back from an injury. And so how do you see that kind of playing out in musicians? Like, what type of things that are not, that, like, I guess coping with, in a healthy way, like what type of stress management things contribute to injury versus, contribute to a healthy life?
It's interesting. We could really talk about positive and negative ways to deal with stress. When I coach somebody, I give them a pretty thorough assessment. And I was with a group called the Taos Opera Institute, and I was meeting with all their participants and talented, wonderful singers. And I finally was talking to this one singer, and I said, I'm not sure what it is, but there's a theme, there's an attitude of there is something in your way. Do you have any idea what it is? And she just looked at me and she said, cannabis.
Oh.
I've just been, I'm aware that I am doing the edibles way too often. See, that's, I would say, would be a maladaptive way of dealing with stress.
Right.
Avoidance is another maladaptive way of dealing with stress. I'm just not going to look at it. I'm not going to deal with it. Denial. Okay. Anything that could take us in directions that are counter to what our goals are. And sometimes that is like changing a goal, but it's more of an avoidance than it is a decision.
Right.
So when we really look at the positive ways of dealing with stress, it's like, first, we got to decide to face this. We've got to be able to look at how we're managing this. And sometimes we set boundaries. Okay, that no needs to be put in place. No, I'm not going to take this gig. No, I'm not going to play that part. I'm not going to do that role. No, I'm not going to do this 7 days a week. I'm going to do it 4 days a week. Performing artists are notorious at not taking time off or giving themselves breaks.
Yes, we are. We are
Yes.
very notorious for that.
Well, and sometimes the industry also supports that. When you look at somebody with a Broadway gig,
Right.
They're supposed to be out there how many times a week?
I think it's 8 shows a week, usually.
That's a lot of shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of effort mentally and physically. And how do you work with that? Clark, probably one of the most important parts about the Stay Healthy team and the attitude that you want to have about your support and your health is nobody else is going to do it but you.
Absolutely.
So to really recognize that you're captain of that team.
Take ownership.
And you get to make the best decisions you can. And you get to pivot when you recognize, oh, I'm taking the path of avoidance. Okay, I'm taking the path of just addiction. I'm taking the path of fear. Okay, what can I face? And what tools and support do I need to do that? And then you get to face it. And that's often where we need support, because we're often our worst enemy when it comes to following through with what we tell ourselves. Oh, I'm not going to eat that donut. I'm going to go exercise. I'm only going to practice for 45 minutes, not an hour and 45 minutes. But we get, sometimes it's harder to honor that, whereas somebody else, is involved, will basically honor that. Oh, I'm supposed to be there. I'm supposed to do this. Okay, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And so, again, just taking on that we're captains of our Stay Healthy team. And it's really our responsibility to keep ourselves in a great mental and physical state so we can share our gifts, sing our songs, tell our stories, play our music. That's what we want to be able to do.
It was interesting. We both took part in a musician's summer camp at BYU in Utah. And you had a class on kind of performance anxiety, right? And helping people manage that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to kind of talk about it was just a 1 hour class for me. And we talked about the kind of like the psychological influences that contribute to injury, right? Or like, for me, it was more of like the mindsets that we get ourselves into that can contribute to injury. And these were all high school students. And I had this one horn player, and she came up to me after the class and was just like, I'm first chair this week in the Wind Symphony, and I feel all this pressure to perform and to do well and all this stuff. And she's like, I just don't feel like I can take a break, because I got to perform at this level, right? And my heart went out to her, because I've been there so many times. I mean, the whole reason why I got myself into an injury was because I felt like I couldn't take a break during a practice session. And it really, what it came down to in my recovery and this conversation I had with this young lady was that at the end of the day, you're in charge.
Yeah. Not
the director, not your section, not the composer. You're in charge of your recovery. You're in charge of your well-being. And what I told her is, you got to listen to your body. And I'm not saying that anytime we encounter like being a musician is hard, right? And we're not running away from that when we're talking about these things. We're embracing it, but also, and not just necessarily setting boundaries, but I think when we change the way we view our progress as a musician, or when we change our view of the different situations we are in these performing situations, and not have that like all or nothing distortion, right? That's what really helps us prevent injury. That's what helps us come back from injury. And so to this young lady, I just said, like, do your best. Obviously, put in the work. And what I'm telling you is not to work less diligently. That's like the one thing that I want people to understand is, like, we're not telling people to work less diligently, but part of that diligent work is putting it in the right frame, right?
We want to work smart. We want to work smart. We want to work
Absolutely.
healthy. We don't want to just work for the sake of working.
Right.
And so, we want to work smart, not hard. And so to be able to tune into our bodies, to be able to be aware of what that best advice is. The research, for example, on prescription medication, there's a high percentage of people who will never take all the pills they're supposed to take. If it says take it for 10 days, I'll take it for 7. That kind of thing. If we're supposed to, again, it's really taking care of ourselves, and physically and emotionally, and recognizing we're the captain of that team.
Absolutely. And another thought about stress management and all that stuff is, like, there are some very strong physical implications with how we manage stress, that manifest themselves in our performing and practicing situations. Like the research is saying that like the more anxious you are, like you're literally like tensing your body, right? The tension increases the more stress you're experiencing in a maladaptive way. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not the psychologist in the room here, but
well, we do know that somewhere between 70 and 90% of our trips to a doctor in our lifetime are going to have stress as an origin somewhere.
That's crazy.
The cortisol, all that stuff that's part of our stress response is literally toxic to our bodies. And it prevents the reparative systems, the immune system from functioning optimally. And so the more stressed we are, the harder it is to manage our health. And so again, we're juggling lots of things every day. And the attitude of like, I have to do it perfectly, or I can't take a break, or I've got to practice one more hour for this audition. Like, no, you don't. I can't tell you how many people I've coached, and it's like, what should you do on the day of the performance? Oh, practice like 4 hours in the morning. No. You go golfing. You go do something else. You clean the bathrooms. You don't practice the day of the performance. You can warm up, but at what point do you say that preparation is complete? And what point can you say this is going to be more than good enough? But it's not going to be perfect, and so really, the question of stress in our lifetimes, we're all used to high levels of stress. What we're not used to doing is maintaining our sense of peace and serenity. And so to think of this as part of our Stay Healthy plan would be to say, okay, what am I doing to maintain peace and serenity in my life? And it's usually going to come back to acceptance and self-care.
Totally.
What creates peace for me?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is just gold for my audience. I'm so happy we are doing this because these things aren't taught in master classes as much as they should, and I want to recognize those educators out there who are doing these things. You are small in number, but hopefully through this and other resources, that will change. And before kind of we start moving towards a close, I would just want to ask if there are some like one or two easy strategies or practices that educators can implement into their routines with their students. I mean, we're talking either private teachers or public educators in like a public school setting to help their students prevent injury from like a psychological perspective. Like what are some tools that could help?
Well, probably one of the first things is, what kind of mindset are you designing? Are we creating a healthy, optimal kind of mindset? Or are we going into like the perfectionism or the win or lose or the good or bad kind of mindset? And so the educator really needs to adopt the mindset that I have a student who's growing, discovering, mastering. It's all good. It's all part of the journey. And so really just being careful to design that mindset. That's one thing that I just see so much success with as I'm coaching people and we start talking about, what is your optimal mindset about? And when we're in our best space, our best self space, we can see ourselves as creative and confident and bold. Well, we all have an ugly space we can get triggered into. And, what happens at that point? I was in San Francisco at the Classical Singer Convention, and I'm talking to this really talented singer. And I said, okay, when you shift into a negative energy, a negative space, what word would describe you in this space? And she goes, talentless.
Ooh, yikes.
And that's just painful. And she was so far from talentless. But again, that's learning how to manage the grief, the negativity, the habits that we've got. And, I'm in that ugly space. How do I get into a more positive space? So mindset would be one of them. If you're a teacher, start every lesson with a 1-minute breathing exercise. This is one of my favorites because this addresses the physical body as well as the mindset. So any of you in your audience, I would love to have you, share this with me or get me some feedback about this, how you're using it. You just take a nice big breath in, body, I'm safe. It's time to relax. Body, relax. Squeeze that fingertip, body, relax. Body relax. Body relax. Body relax. Other hand. I am bold. I'm confident. I'm excited. I'm enjoying this. I got this. Now that takes less than a minute to do. But it really is just a very simple yet very powerful strategy. Kind of attacks the body as well as the mind in terms of the mindset.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, to bring it into a musical analogy, right? It's that whole tension and release, right? You're squeezing your finger. And if anybody's just listening to the audio, I'd invite you to get onto YouTube and watch us doing this. But, it's squeezing your finger, it's a tension, and then you're releasing that tension and you're coming into this flow, shall we say, right? And that's just, go ahead.
Another thing that I would really just encourage us all to start to do, I was talking to a music educator who just finished her first year teaching elementary school music. And she goes, John, I can't tell you how many times this year I heard, Miss Beal, I am so nervous. I loved her response. It'd be like, Clark, that's okay. You're just activated. Like this nervous thing, it's not a big deal. It's just your sympathetic nervous system's activated.
Right.
Okay. Let's do a breathing exercise. But just the way she described that, that's okay. You're just activated.
That's all it is.
That's all it is. And so let's work with this. Let's manage it. So yeah, there's just so many different things that we can do, and just recognizing that it's a one day at a time adventure. And it's kind of like our lives are filled with all these circles and we're trying to get them aligned. And the closer we can get them aligned, the better. But they rarely stay all like locked into a single circle. It's like stuff's always moving. And so we got to be aware of that dynamic nature of life. And we have those moments where we're really in the flow of things. We got those moments when we're really in the struggle of things. Well, we want to move through that struggle, get back into the flow, go back to struggle, go back to flow.
Absolutely. And speaking of flow, kind of as we're wrapping up here, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share what you've been working on, because you're no longer a clinical psychologist, right? Kind of go into like what you're working on now. I've had the privilege of working with you a little bit on this project that is super exciting, and I'm really excited for you to share it with my audience as a hopefully a future resource for them, specifically with like performance anxiety, and maybe talk about the thing you got behind you there and what you got going on.
Well, I have lots of different things going on, and in between lots of sessions for years, I've been developing and working the tools and skills, teaching my class at BYU as a performance psychologist. And so in October of last year, I shut down my clinical practice, and now I'm full-time working and developing this process that I believe makes music a much more enjoyable experience, makes performing a much more enjoyable experience. And so bringing the psychological skills and tools of peak performance as an equal level of technique and style and music. It's like we want to develop a great mindset and all the psychological skills to equal and support our musical skills. And when we can start to do that, so many wonderful things change. I've been coaching a lot of people recently, and let's just say it's been really fun to watch their performance dread disappear. In a sense, they have this love-hate relationship with performing. I'm going to my gig, I'm going to my show, I'm going to my concert, and there's this sense of dread about it. And it's like, no, we don't have to dread this. This is a choice you're making. You've got tools and skills. You've got the mental skills to support it. The majority of our poor performances are not because of a lack of practice. If anything, we over-practice. And so developing those mental skills really allows us to bring our musical best forward and cope with all the different challenges that we have. So currently right now, I do individual coaching. And so I see people one-on-one, typically over Zoom. And whether this is helping them get ready for an audition or develop skills that they need, just where they're at in their challenges. The one-on-one coaching is amazing. It's just so exciting to watch what comes from that. The other thing that I'm doing right now is workshops. And so I have workshops that I'm due periodically, and they're available. You can find them on my website. Dr. Jon Skidmore is my website. And so there's always some material there that I'm using and doing. Clark, you've been helping me with a thing called 30 Days to Peak Performance, which is part of a workbook. It's a video series of what to do every day for 30 days before a performance. One thing that your audience would really, I'd love them to take advantage of this. Twice a month, on the second Wednesday and the third Wednesday. Second Wednesday is 9 o'clock in the morning. Third Wednesday is 5 o'clock in the evening, Mountain Time. I do a peak performance masterclass. And so any of you teachers out there, you want your student to be coached by me for free, have them come to my masterclass and let me know that they're showing up, and we'll talk. And we have them perform, and then we talk about their emotional, mental experience of performing. Not necessarily how to make the sound better or the technique clearer. It's like, what's going on mentally? So that monthly masterclass has really been a lot of fun. And it's been really exciting, too, to use that as I'm coaching somebody, to have them to perform where I get to actually observe that, and they get to go through that performance process. And so, I've got lots of different things going on, just excited about things, and looking forward to sharing and developing the tools that help all of us as performers, as performing artists, to create freedom and joy and excitement on our stages and in our lives. And as we do that, life is just so much more fun. And it's just so much more exciting. And so, if there's any way I can be of help to you or any of your guests, please have them contact me. Also, right now on my website, I'm offering a kind of a discovery conversation, for 30 minutes where we can just talk about what's going on for you and what suggestions that I might have that can make a difference for you. And, I may not be the coach you want to work with or the coach that you need, but if you understand what I offer, you might be the person that wants to work with me. And I would certainly love and enjoy working with you.
Absolutely. And I've been working on this 30 days project, and it's so beneficial. I highly recommend everybody. I'm not sure when this will come out in relation to the podcast and everything, but if it's out and available by the time this episode is released, I'll definitely put it in the show notes and all this information, so that because this is just what we're doing here at the show is just pointing people in the right directions, not giving them like specific, treading in uncharted waters of trying to give specific diagnoses or anything like that, but just pointing them to people who can help, right? And I love how you said like bringing the mental and the psychological skills up to the musical skills, because especially in like an academic setting, it's always the musical skills, right?
Yeah.
And I love just seeing that paradigm shift, right? Or at least like I'm trying to get in so the camera can see, but like how they're on the same level. Because not only the musical skills will help in obviously musical situations, or the psychological skills will help in musical situations, but also in the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Stress management, a lot of stress in your life actually doesn't come from your instrument. It comes from just being a human being. And so managing that is just so important. So,
Clark, one of the things you're talking about is what I like to refer to as the difference between the old school approach to performing and performing well, which is all based in practice. The more you practice, even the more you practice performing. We had a young lady over to our house. Her grandma is in my neighborhood. Her teacher was asking her students to perform 10 times in a row before the recital that's a couple days off. Well, that's the old school approach. Now, there's value in practicing. There's value in repetition. No question about that. But it's not about more practice. Poor performance, do we need more practice? Not necessarily. Poor performance, is it because we're not good enough? No. Typically, if we have a breakdown in performance, it's because of the mental skills or the emotional stuff that's going on, not the musical skills. And so the current approach to, great performing really is bringing both of those into balance. And I call it the old school approach because that's what I taught when I was 12. That's what I was taught when I was 12. And it's still being taught everywhere pretty much. And we've got to break out of that and say, okay, let's practice smart. Let's develop a mindset. Let's develop tools and skills. Let's understand the psychology, the neuropsychology of peak performance. Let's learn how to step that up so we can step into flow, because that's really our goal.
Flow's the goal.
Flow's the goal.
Yeah. So many great moments from this episode. It's such a great way to start off the second season. I like to ask my guests 2 questions at the end of each interview. The first one is, let's say someone came up to you on the street and said, "Hey, Dr. Jon, I listened to your conversation with Clark on Trust the Process, and I'm going through an injury myself. What can I do? What's one thing that you can tell me that I can apply or that can help me?" What would you say to that person?
Understand the injury and really understand what it is and get really clear with that. And then manage that emotional side of it, because that emotional side is going to be what's going to be directing your recovery and how you cope with the different challenges with that. And really to know that you're not alone. So many people, self-included, we've run into injuries. There was at one point I could not sing a line of any song. My voice was so raw, so damaged. And so again, this is part of managing who you are as a performer, and to be able to start to take care of yourself. And that would be the number one thing I'd say is, okay, how are you taking care of yourself? Both physically and emotionally.
Awesome. That audit is really, really important for everybody going through an injury, and also those who aren't going through an injury but are trying to prevent one, right?
Yes. Well, staying healthy, really, physically and emotionally, good technique, that kind of stuff, proper rest, that's really what we need to do to stay healthy.
Absolutely. And the second question I ask is usually, obviously for people who have gone through an injury, but you've gone through some pretty exciting changes in your life recently that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would venture to guess weren't the easiest things to go through, right? I know quitting I don't know from personal experience, but quitting or closing down a practice that you've had for a number of years to pursue a new dream has got to be very intimidating and difficult at times. And so I just ask, it's like, if you go back to October or any part when you started going down this path of being a coach, and you had the opportunity to just kind of either keep going as a coach or start that path, or just to kind of keep on the path of being a clinical psychologist, which is a great and amazing field. For you personally, has this journey been worth it to you to keep going with the coaching?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really do cherish what I've been able to do in the realm of a clinical psychologist. And that is a different domain than the coaching world. As a psychologist, someone's run off the road, they've crashed the car, and they're hurt. It's like, how do we get them back on the road moving forward? From a coaching standpoint, it's, okay, where's it you want to go? What's the map to get you there? What tools do you need? What's a reasonable timeline? Okay, what's an unreasonable timeline? How are we going to get you there? What do you need to get you there? And so, I've been taking advantage of different coaching opportunities myself. And it's really, you talk about trusting the process. That's one of your big phrases. Right. And to say, okay, if this is your course, trust the process and work every day at what you can do to move forward. You're going to find setbacks. You're going to find problems. You're going to make mistakes. And oversight on my part lost me my domain name, so I'm starting over right now under Dr. Jon Skidmore, not jonskidmore.com. That was a mistake on my part. And it's like, last Monday was not a happy day, and it's just like, whoa.
Yeah, I remember that conversation.
But see, those are the things that you have to work with. Whether it's an oversight, whether it's an accident, whether it's an unforeseen, it's like, okay, at some point we got to go through that process, regroup, chart a course, and just keep moving forward.
Keep moving forward. That has been another phrase of mine, my own personal experience. It's just so beautiful. This has been such an awesome conversation. Dr. Jon Skidmore, I'm so grateful for you and your time today. Just to all of you guys listen out there, you literally struck gold with this episode. I would listen to this, share it, and listen to it again, and just keep seeing if there's little things that you can apply in your life, whether you're going through an injury or not. And like, cause we said, these are life skills and principles. If you are interested in, reaching out to Jon, drjonskidmore.com. Also, and there will be more information coming out about this through the podcast. But you can actually send us a message at the podcast in your show notes on the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. There's a link that says "Send us a text," and I'd love to hear from how this episode benefited you. And I know Dr. Jon Skidmore, Dr. Jon,
yes.
Jon, all yes. three would love to hear that as well. And share where you're listening from. We have people listening to this show from 25 plus countries.
That's exciting.
And so tell us where you're listening from, how this impacted you, and how you're going to use it moving forward. I cannot express to you how much that fills my cup, and I know that would fill Jon's cup as well. And so,
Clark, I just want to acknowledge you in what you're doing. This is part of your pivoting. This is part of your moving forward with things. And you're really creating resources and tools that are going to have lots of impacts with lots of different people in different ways. So I'm just thrilled to be a part of this, and look forward to our continued association. And again, for your listeners, if I can be of support to you, please contact me, reach out. And because it's really about, we're going to risk, we got to fail, but we got to risk again. Mm-hmm. So It's really about risking, failing, and risking again. So that's what peak performers do. Absolutely.
So to all of you guys out there in podcast land, keep on keeping on, guys. Keep moving forward, and keep trusting the process. Until next time. Hey, before you go, we need your help with something real quick. Somewhere out there is a musician who is going through an injury or just a tough time. There may even be an educator with a student in that situation that they don't know how to help. We need your help in getting this message to them. Would you do them the favor of sharing this episode on your socials and with your friends? Also, cliche that it may have become, leaving a rating and a review actually does help people find us, not just boost our ego. So would you take a quick second and leave us a review so that musician can find us more easily? If you want to reach out to me personally, I would love to hear from you. Just look for the Send Us a Text Message button in the show notes of the episode. You can do that on any episode on your chosen podcast platform except YouTube. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. I want to extend another heartfelt thanks to my team, without which this podcast would not be able to happen. Thanks to Daniel Baldwin, our audio engineer, Kevin West, our music and sound effects coordinator, and Dana Lovell, our promotional materials coordinator. So to all of you out there in podcast land, keep on keeping on and trust the process.